Welcome back, everybody, to Joe's Bibles. Those of you who watch my channel undoubtedly watch Tim Frisch's video and his videos and his channel, and he's going to join me here today because we're going to talk about the CSB. A few videos ago, I put out a video letting people know that I'm going to be going through the Christian Standard Bible from September 1st to December 31st, and I'm trying to get as many people as I can to join me and I thought, you know what would be really good to convince more people is if we get the man, the guy who loves the CSB on this video, on this channel, and to get his perspective on it. So, Tim, could you just share a little bit about your channel and your purpose for starting your channel?
Yeah, well, my channel is called A Frisch Perspective, and not everybody catches on to this. I had someone who I think has watched my channel for years who just realized it, just like the light bulb went on for them, that frisch in German means fresh. So it's
Oh,
a fresh perspective, actually. If you see the play on words, I think another light went on for you. Yeah,
well,
yeah.
I don't speak German, but I mean, that's a great call thing, though. I mean, at the end of your videos, just to let you know, one of my kids has he recognizes you and he calls you, oh, that fresh guy, that fresh perspective guy. I said, no, it's called Frisch. Wow, that's cool. I don't speak German.
Yeah, your child is picking up on that there's a similar sound to it, obviously. Fresh sounds a lot like frisch. Yeah, so it's really, on one hand, saying, hopefully I'm giving people kind of a fresh perspective, but also it's my perspective. It's a Frisch perspective. It's my particular perspective. And I always say that I'm giving analysis, reviews, and fun. I try to do it in a hopefully engaging and somewhat lighthearted way. I think people know that when I talk about things, I do try to take the important things seriously, but at the same time, there are a lot of things that we tend to take more seriously than we probably should in some cases. We get really worked up about certain things, or maybe we just need to take a step back and really evaluate things before we make a judgment call.
Mm.
And Bible translations is one of those things. People sometimes get really worked up about their view of something, and they haven't necessarily taken the time to understand all of the issues and really hear some different angles on it to come to a good conclusion as to how they should view Bible translation. So
Yeah.
that's basically what my channel is trying to do: give a fresh perspective, analysis, reviews. I do a lot of Bible reviews and do it in a way that hopefully will be, you know, helpful to people to think through things and create good dialogue about different discussions.
Okay, let's jump into the CSB. Want to know from you, Tim, your background with the CSB. How did you end up reading it?
Well, it I think started maybe at conferences that I went to. That probably was one of the first places that I heard about the what was at the time the HCSB, the
Mm.
Holman Christian Standard Bible. So I actually have here one of the Bibles that I got from the Together for the Gospel conference. And inside they had the promo with this Bible talking about its kind of unique features. The funny thing about the unique features is that some of the things that were unique to the Holman Christian Standard Bible were actually changed in the Christian Standard Bible. So some of
Mm.
its very marketing highlights that kind of were, I would admit, made it sometimes a little quirky, I guess, or unusual compared to other Bible translations. But also was its justification as far as like, hey, look, we're something different. When they updated it to the Christian Standard Bible, they kind of toned down some of that. So, for
Mm.
example, in the Holman Christian, they had the name of God as Yahweh
Mhm.
quite often, not all the time. It's not like the LSB is today, but in the Old Testament, there were times, quite a few times, where they would translate the name of God as Yahweh in the original iteration of this Bible. Um, but then when they switched over to the Christian Standard Bible, they went back to just universally translating the name of God as Lord, all
Mm.
capital letters, Lord. So I read it as the HCSB, I actually did a read through of it in the early 2010s and found it to be very, very good. I kind of described it at the time like and I think it's pretty accurate, like a conservative approach, similar to the NIV, but maybe even more conservative in some ways. I'm not talking so much about theology as I'm talking about more approach to language and some of the hot button issues. But then I did a read through of the Christian Standard Bible, the most recent update in 2019. I think I read through it in like 90 days. Did one of their Bible reading plans, and I think it took me a little more than 90 days. But the point is, I got through it quickly, and I find it's a translation that is really good for that. I mean, it's you don't get bogged down with weird wording. It's just very natural English. It's one of the real advantages and wonderful aspects of this translation is that it reads like English. It really does. I mean, you're reading it and it's like, yep, that's the way I write. That's the way I talk. That is English. Is that the only kind of Bible that we want to have? No, I like traditional sounding Bibles, and the King James Bible is beautiful. So I don't only use the Holman Christian or the Christian Standard, but it's one of my favorites, especially as a complement to some of those more traditional translations. So that's kind of my background and experience and how I got started reading it. Oh, and I also taught from it occasionally, especially like in a Christian high school setting with students. I found that that was a setting where, these are younger people. They don't necessarily have all the experience and technical knowledge that adults in a church setting might have. And so I just wanted something that was going to strike them. And that's the other thing about English, when it's in your vernacular language, it hits you immediately because it's the way that you normally hear things. It's the way that resonates with your heart. And so I think that when you're reading, even to young people or people newer to the Bible, it can just really hit home sometimes when you're reading the Christian Standard Bible, and it's like, I get it. That's just saying it very clearly the way that you would normally say it in English. So that was my experience with the Christian Standard Bible.
So that sounds to me like you've got a pretty rich history with it, going all the way back to the HCSB.
Yeah, I mean, I read it in 2011, 2012 maybe, and the HCSB came out in 2004. So it did take me quite a while, even myself, before I got around to really reading it and really taking it seriously as something I wanted to get into. I used the New King James in my home church for many years because our former pastor, that's what he used. So that a lot of times influences you, what your pastor's using and what you grew up with. So I grew up with the King James, and my pastor, when I got out of college, was using the New King James. So that was my background. And that's why to this day, you'll hear me say really good things about the New King James as well. There's definitely a bias there.
Give us 3 good, convincing reasons to read the CSB.
Yeah, I can definitely give 3 reasons. I'm actually going to smuggle in a 4th one too.
Do it.
But I'll keep it to 3 points. I'll be sneaky about it. So the first one is translation philosophy. The reason I would advocate for the Christian Standard Bible is because they have a translation philosophy that I think is brilliant. And I don't think it's just a marketing tool. I mean, to some degree, it does market their translation, but I actually think there's merit to it. It's called optimal equivalence. The idea is that they want to, and I was reading this today on their website, they want to account for everything that's in the original text, in the language, all the words and how they're being used. That's hard to do if at the same time you're trying to also have very clear, smooth English. So they don't want to miss anything. If there's a word there, they want to somehow account for what's there if they can. And the accounting for each word is typically called formal equivalence.
Right.
But translations that get really into formal equivalence, like the NASB is known to do, have been criticized many times for being kind of clunky, especially in certain places. It can just become like, it doesn't sound like English, or it's not very clear. And ironically, I would even argue sometimes the author was clearer in the original language than it comes across in English in certain cases. So that's why not being too hung up on being formally equivalent can be helpful. And the CSB gives that wiggle room. So the way I would summarize this is it's clear, but it's careful. Because if you're trying to be clear, there is a tendency with some translations, in my view, that, and I think for some uses, this is fine. They're just like, we just want someone to really understand it and get it right away. But sometimes you're missing some of the nuances of the original language, or some of the technical aspects of what the author's saying. And the other danger is you can get into like almost spoon feeding people, like where the translator, they'll never understand this unless I spell it out as clear. So the CSB balances that out. It's not spoon feeding, but it's also not trying to be, unnecessarily difficult in how you would understand the text. I really appreciate that. So the translation philosophy, and I'll give you one example, John 3:16. God loved the world in this way, that he gave his only son. Now, that's not your traditional translation. It's typically God so loved the world. But how would we really say that in English? God loved the world in this way. He gave his only son. What's another traditional thing we do? We put only begotten. Now that gets, people have theological, but here's what I would argue. If we never had that word in our previous Bibles, if you just started translating today, I don't think the word begotten, it's just not a word we even have in English anymore. I don't think that would be the word we would use. That's my personal view. Now, I'm glad we have it in our traditional translations, but I like having a translation that is unbounded, that doesn't feel the need to use the way we worded things before. The CSB in John 3:16 is like, if you're going to translate it today, not thinking about the past, but thinking about the present, that's how you would translate it. It's clear, it's careful. So that's the first one, is translation philosophy. The second one I would advocate for it would be the contributors to the Christian Standard Bible. It was spearheaded by the Southern Baptist Publishing, which was Lifeway Publishers. It gets kind of a reputation of being a Southern Baptist translation, but in reality, if you look at the background, they had, I think, 100 scholars that gave input from 17 different denominations. So actually, I would say the contributors for it were very diverse and very open, kind of open in their approach. They were not trying to come up with a Baptist orientation in their translation. And I think actually the Christian Standard Bible, the newest iteration of it, is known for being very fair. I mean, I've seen people from all different denominations using it. But the other thing I like about the contributors, they're not only diverse, they're theologically very strong believers. People who really believe in the inspiration of Scripture. So it gives a trustworthiness to it, that it's not just people who are translating as an academic exercise or from a scholarly perspective. That's part of it, is they want to be scholarly, but they also are firm believers in Scripture. And so there's a spiritual element in their approach. And I think a good example of what I'm talking about with contributors is the footnotes. The footnotes are fantastic. They're pretty extensive, and they're very helpful. The translator notes, very helpful. And you don't get that in every translation, but the Christian Standard Bible has really good footnotes. So the translation philosophy, the contributors, and then the third one would be the editions of the Christian
Mm.
Standard Bible. And this is where I
Yeah.
smuggle in the fourth, which is that with having these editions, they've been widely accepted by the church. It's growing in its popularity, and it's being accepted by more and more Christians and utilized by more and more Christians from diverse Christian communities. And so having that widespread impact, I think, is another huge point in its favor, because I hate to say it, but it's kind of true. Like, if a translation is quite good, but nobody is using it,
Mhm.
it kind of hampers it, to be honest. And I know it's a catch-22, because how are people going to use it unless we can say it's good? Yeah, but the truth is, just like the King James, why was the King James so popular for hundreds of years? Because it was really good.
Mhm.
And I would argue that the best translations over time, obviously there's factors, such as, do you have good publicity? Do you have good advertising? Of course, that's a factor. But at the end of the day, you can have all the publicity in the world, and if people are reading it and they're catching things about it that are like, that's not good, it's just not going to be as popular. The Christian Standard Bible just hits such a sweet spot. It is, again, careful in its scholarship, and people that are pretty particular read it and they're like, yeah, that's accurate. But at the same time, the everyday person can pick it up and go, I understand it. It's
Mm.
not weird.